Hi there, welcome to a series of videos called English for Emerson. On this channel we do a little bit of everything, and lately we've been talking about early American history, and today we're going to be talking about the Aztecs. How did they rise to power, what their culture was like, and how they fell. And it's very interesting, and I'm not going to tell you, of course, everything about it because it's a massive amount of information. I'm just going to give a very, very brief discussion of this topic. I'm going to try not to go off too much. The Aztecs ruled the area of central Mexico, and they were ruling this area at the time of the arrival of Christopher Columbus. When Christopher Columbus went back to talk to the king and queen of Portugal after his discovery, naturally it sparked the interest of other adventurers and people who wanted to make some money. And he went back again on multiple trips to the Americas, and also other people started to make expeditions. And perhaps the most famous of all was the expedition of Herman Cortez. I'll put up his picture on the screen. He led a group of conquistadors. That is a Spanish word for conquerors. I'm talking about, I believe, 11 ships, a few hundred men. They had, I think, 16 horses, and they went to America in the year 1519. Listen, if you just think about this for a second, people were curious about this new land, and they talked to Christopher Columbus and the other explorers and asked, well, what kind of weapons do they have? Well, they have bows and arrows, and they have clubs and spears, but they don't have any cannons. They don't have horses. They don't have swords. They don't know about metal, really. They don't know about iron. They're pretty vicious, but they don't really have modern weapons. It seems like they'd be pretty easy to beat in battle. They also have a tremendous amount of gold. That's what the rumors were that were coming back to Europe, was that these people had a lot of wealth in the form of silver and gold. Well, I'm telling you, there's nothing that's going to pique the interest of a king like the words silver and gold, because they're always looking for more money and more treasure. After all, that's what funds their whole entire machine of building roads and bridges and developing their country, as well as providing money for their military. They need to fund it with gold. So this expedition went out with Herman Cortez in 1519, and when he arrived at the Americas and got off all the boats and got all these horses and their cannons off and all their stuff, like, well, what are we going to do? Well, they had to get some information from other people who were in that area, and they found some people. They actually found a what you call a monk, a friar. He was trying to convert these natives to Christianity. He had been there and he'd learned how to speak the local language. And they also, traded and got slaves who were capable of speaking the language and translating and things like that. And they learned that there was a local empire called the Aztecs who were extremely powerful and who basically wreaked havoc over this whole entire area with warfare and demands for taxes. And they were very, very brutal and very, very tough, and a very big empire. And of course, this was very interesting to Herman Cortez because it was also known and rumored that these people had a tremendous amount of silver and gold. So naturally, these conquistadors, with all their modern weapons and everything, started to engage in battles with the local tribes and were very successful in battle with their modern weapons, even though there was only a few hundred of them. These people who lived in this area of Mexico had been warring with each other for hundreds of years. The Aztec Empire was particularly brutal. They believed that there was, and I have to put on my glasses to read this, okay? Their religion was based around a god by the name of Huitzilopochtli. I'll put that up on the screen and put a picture up of this god. This was a god of war and the sun. These people, the Aztecs, believed that the sun was spit out of the underworld every morning, and it went through the sky, and then it was eaten up by this horrible, like, goddess of the underworld. It would take the sun down and then spit it up again each morning. And that, this god of war and the sun, who kind of had the power to keep all this going, keep the sun rising up every day. Well, this god had to be appeased. It had to be fed. And it had to be fed, they believed, with human blood. That's what they thought. And so what these Aztecs did is when they went out warring with other tribes, they would capture the enemy soldiers alive. Can you believe this? And they would bring them back to a big pyramid in the Aztec Empire, and they would take the enemy soldier up to the top of the pyramid and kill him. And they would have the blood go down the sides of the pyramid. This was how they fed the god Huitzilopochtli. That's particularly brutal if you think about it. And they did this regularly, and it went on for hundreds of years. The Aztecs also demanded very high taxes from these neighboring tribes that they did war with. And if they didn't pay, obviously, they were going to cause trouble for them, big trouble. You can imagine that this empire, the Aztecs, over the course of time, because of their treatment of these neighboring tribes, all this war and all this taking of their soldiers for these human sacrifices and all these taxes, you can imagine that it would cause a tremendous amount of resentment over the course of time. And I've told you on this channel that history tends to repeat itself. Over the course of human history, there's been multiple empires that have treated people very, very badly and basically stomped on their heads and demanded high taxes and caused tremendous amount of resentment among neighboring people. And this is one of the reasons why empires throughout time have fallen. They expand, they treat their neighbors badly and abuse them horribly, and eventually the resentment builds up, and then the scales kind of rebalance, and the neighboring tribes figure out some way to defeat this horrible empire. Well, this has happened multiple times in human history, and it's certainly what happened this time. There was a neighboring tribe that was called, I'll put the name up on the screen, the Tlaxcalans. They had been fighting the Aztecs for centuries, and they had never been fully defeated, but they took tremendous losses, and they were tremendously resentful of these Aztecs and wanted them gone. But the Aztecs were tremendously difficult to defeat for a couple of reasons. They had very, very, very powerful warriors, the Eagle warriors, and they also had a capital where the emperor lived. The emperor's name was Moctezuma, and he lived in this capital called Tenochtitlan. It was out in the middle of a huge lake. I'll put up maps on the screen. It was in the middle of this lake called Lake Texcoco. Okay? I hope I'm not pronouncing the names too badly, but that's just life if I am. This city sat out in the middle of this lake, and he lived out there. So in order to defeat him, you were going to have to row out there in boats and do battle with these soldiers who were protecting him on this island. Very, very difficult to defeat. So these people, the Tlaxcalans, had been fighting with the Aztecs for a long time, and they were probably praying for a long, long time for someone to come along to help them get rid of these horrible Aztecs. And you can just imagine what it was like for these Tlaxcalans who first encountered the Conquistadors and Herman Cortez. These guys had horses, they had swords made of metal, they had cannons that shot metal out and made extremely amount of incredible noise. They said, oh my God, these guys are only a couple hundred people, but they're extremely difficult to deal with. I mean, these warriors are like warriors from God. They couldn't believe it. And they fought with them for a while, but after a while, they're like, you know what? Maybe we should use these conquistadors to our advantage, because these guys are so incredible with these horses and these cannons and these swords. Maybe they can help us defeat the Aztecs. And so the Tlaxcalans made a deal with Herman Cortez and the conquistadors. They said, listen, well, you guys are really incredible, and we really don't want to fight with you anymore. Our primary enemy is this horrible emperor by the name of Moctezuma, and these terrible Aztecs that have been taking our people for years and charging us taxes if we give in to them. Do you follow me? And they've been terrorizing all the neighboring tribes around here for hundreds of years. And they also have a heck of a lot of silver and gold. Naturally, Herman Cortez was like, oh, this sounds fantastic. Absolutely, we'll team up with you. Let's go. Let's go to Lake Texcoco and meet this Emperor Moctezuma and see if we can defeat this Aztec Empire. And this is going to work out just fantastic. And so the Tlaxcalans and the conquistadors set out for Tenochtitlan to deal with the Aztecs. And in the next video, we'll talk about how it went. And that's all we got to say on this edition of English for Emerson. Bye-bye.